Hi, everyone. Back in 2019, I saw a very moving performance at the Russian Art Museum called Bone Mother. It was very compelling story and dance, aerial arts, music. And today I am sitting down with one of the co-creators, directors, Danielle Siver. Thank you so much, Danielle Siver, for agreeing to sit down and have this chat with me. And as you know, you and I never met before, but I did go to your production of Bone Mother that was at the Russian Art Museum in the fall of 2019. So I was wondering if we could just start by you telling us about that show.
Sure. The seeds of the idea, and of course I have a cat because we're in a Zoom meeting. The seeds of the idea for Bone Mother started years even before that with my dear friend Evelyn de Girolamo. It was sort of like stewing in her mind for quite a period of time, just the idea of not only doing something with aerial silks that we did and with Russian folktales, but something that kind of reflects on feminine energies and sort of the holiness of nature and these rites of passage, all of these kind of ideas. So she and I met a number of times before we got going, when she asked me to be part of it, and sort of meditated on these ideas together. And then we had auditions and we started building the show. But to kind of give it you, I'll try to do the elevator speech portion of like the Sandbox Theater process. So this show was made through Sandbox Theater, who makes all of their shows from scratch using a series of prescribed play activities. So there are activities designed to kind of remove your filter when you're creating on the spot and not thinking, self-judging, oh, what am I saying? Oh, what did I just do? And then we all work together to decide, does that belong in the show? Does that not? We keep refining, and then we get what you finally see. And in this case, we had a group of 5 actors, and we made the show over the summer of 2019 and then performed it at the Museum of Russian Art, which was just a beautiful and sort of like sacred feeling space. For anybody who's ever been there, I'm sure you agree, it did in fact used to be a church. And all the elements that we had initially talked about, Evie and I, really came to fruition, which is like so satisfying. And it's so satisfying to hear that it kind of lit up those questions in your brain, the same questions that we were thinking about and asking ourselves and asking the cast when we made it. Yeah, it was a thrill, and it was a really beautiful experience.
It was beautiful to witness as well. So can you give us just like a brief overview of like the story, that the narrative thread, and then some of the different, it was a very multimedia experience as well. So some of those different multimedia elements.
Absolutely. So the story follows some traditional Russian folktale characters. The protagonist is a young woman named Vasilisa. She occurs in a lot of different Russian folktales as sort of like all folktales, it's teaching some kind of moralistic stance usually. And she learns a lesson, and then she, gets to kind of like proceed through this rite of passage because she has learned. And the other main character is Baba Yaga. She is an old crone. And the tellings of Baba Yaga have pulled from a lot of different, let's say, like central themes. So sometimes she is thought of as just purely evil, just a witch, and other times she's more maternal, more grandmotherly. She is putting you to the test, putting Vasilisa to the test to really like allow Vasilisa to understand what she's made of. So that our story was 3 parts of Vasilisa's life. She was a young girl, and then she was in sort of her like 30s, 40s, and then she herself was an older elder of the community. And we follow her as she first encounters Baba Yaga in this sort of traditional fairy tale sense as a young girl. She gets put through her paces and then gets sent back home. And then in her middle years, she's kind of struggling with identity, struggling with being othered in her own society. And this is where we sort of start to see Vasilisa connect with Baba Yaga in a certain sense. Like, is this crone evil, or is she othered because of her power, because of her knowing, her deep spirituality? And then finally, this is a spoiler alert, but nobody will ever see the show if they didn't see it before, so I can't. She becomes an elder in her community, and she learns to take the place of Baba Yaga in the end. And so there's a ceremony of passing through this gate that Baba Yaga is known to guard between this world and the next world. She ushers people through, makes them feel safe, and this becomes Vasilisa's job. She is the next Baba Yaga, and Baba Yaga disappears into her next realm. And the whole story was told through aerial acrobatics on silks, which the church museum has a huge tall ceiling, and we rigged professional silks from the ceiling and taught actors, aside from one of them, all from scratch, how to do aerial acrobatics. And also used all those sandbox techniques we learned before to make a really physical, sort of expressionistic, abstract in some ways, piece that moved across the whole space and had a wonderful live band that improvised much of the music, created it all in the space with us to get a really rich soundscape too.
Right. And then how do you see those different, the aerial arts and the music, which was also fantastic, and just, the visual elements? How do you see those different elements adding to the experience of the story and being a part of that story? Taking the story to a place that reading a fairy tale doesn't do necessarily.
It's always my aesthetic to see and make shows that aren't so linear, that are nothing like what you might see if you turn the television on. Not that there's anything wrong with turning the television on, but if you're going to something, I want the audience to feel, I want to feel like I'm really experiencing something that's making my brain have to work, that's making me draw my own conclusions. So I'm really drawn to this physical style of storytelling, where the audience might be wondering, what did that particular dance sequence mean? What did that soundscape mean? I think all of that, and then pulling in the aerial silk, takes you totally out of reality. Moving to this vertical plane removes even this sense that that gravity exists in this other world, that any of the normal forces that act on us exist in this world. So trying to pull the audience as far out of what they walked out from 54th Street into the museum, as far away from there as possible. Hence the eerie music, the Russian music at some times, Ukrainian music other times, the eerie and different lighting that feels really surreal, costumes that sometimes conceal the whole face, things like that. I find really appealing in theater. I like to be very theatrical, very abstract. So I had never worked directly in aerial work. Evie has a lot of experience in that, but she has long wanted to marry those two disciplines, and I think they really work well together if you're into that abstract style, that fantastical style. And of course, fairy tales work with that, dovetail completely, right?
Right. I love that. And what I love is, when you said, operating on that vertical plane, how it takes you out of reality. And that calls to my mind how, hundreds of years ago, when, say, Gothic cathedrals were being built, and the idea behind it was that as you entered the doorway, you were taken out of ordinary space and time. And that is the transcendent, that transcendent meaning out of ordinary space and time. And so there being this sense of taking people out of the ordinary logical world, and then like you said, being in this fantastical with the music and the all these different things happening. And it's like it allows your mind to go to these sort of spiritual wonderings, and big questions, that are much deeper than what is felt like on an ordinary day-to-day life sort of thing.
Exactly.
I love that.
I mean, that's so interesting. And like, not to interrupt, sorry, but I'm like very inspired by the idea that like what I find to be like my church is like the initial intention of a church also. Like those things are so much more similar than we might ever think.
Right, exactly. And as I mentioned to you earlier, when I was watching the show and knowing, because I live just a couple blocks away, knowing that did used to be a church building, as I was watching the show, wondering, what if this was church? What if because you have communities of people, different beliefs, different backgrounds, whatever, but groups of people gathering regularly, in community to share sacred stories, to practice getting out of the chatter of their minds, and into this deeper sense of the expansiveness of our spirits. What if this was church? What if coming to shows like that, what if creating shows like that was church, was Sunday school, was what we mean by spiritual communities? So just wondering what your sort of, what rises up in you as you hear me say that.
I mean, so much, Carolyn. Like you're really speaking my language there. Specifically, creating to me is like that. It's a toss up between whether creating and nature are my spiritual home. So like, why not make a show that was like clearly those two things like married? But the community aspect of creating, the vulnerability brought into the room by the artists when they're really speaking from their own experiences and their own heart and their own creativity and off the cuff. It's hard to find that kind of closeness, especially as an adult, and that kind of community in this world. I'm always really touched in making a show from scratch that people come in and they willingly do this. They willingly open up and they give. They might be a little bit withdrawn at first and questioning, but inevitably there's this act of trust. There's this leap forward, because we all commonly want to make something beautiful in this world. We all want to give the gift to our community of a beautiful story, of something that didn't exist before and does now. However, insignificant and therefore like completely significant that is, right?
Right.
So that community space of creating the show is almost like everything to me. The performance piece is delightful. It was particularly delightful to be a director because I could like squirrel up into the balcony of the museum and look down and see people being delighted by the show and being moved by the show. And as a performer in the past, I would never have gotten that experience. So that was a little added bonus. And to hear like what other people thought of it after the fact, and that I really believe there's no right thing to get out of the show, but that they got some common things that we were communicating, like that bowls me over. That underscores the connectedness of humanity, when we're so liable, especially now, to feel very disconnected from each other and to assume that we don't share any opinions or we don't share any spiritual leanings, that we're all alone in this world, and we aren't meant to be.
Right. And that being, to me, like sort of what makes when I say sharing sacred stories, that's what makes a story sacred, right? It's something that connects to different people on this deeper kind, like it means something to them and their life experience. There's something too about like those ancestral roots, and like ancestry.com tells me that I am 99% Eastern European. So I could really, I'm like, as I'm listening to the, all the music and everything, is this the music of my people sort of thing? So it's, there's something about that I think makes a story sacred too, like how it connects us to not only like ourselves and the people that we're in the room with, but like through generations and culturally and all of that. Was that part of the process of the conversations?
Yeah, I think something we really cognizantly did was try to view Vasilisa through both like a classical lens and through a modern lens, knowing that everything is different now than when Vasilisa was conceived of. However, humans are also humans, so she likely had very complex emotions then as well as she does now. So like we connected to the conception of Vasilisa in the first story where she was a child. We pretty much followed like a really traditional Vasilisa tale. She goes out to the forest, she meets Baba Yaga, she goes through like 3 different tasks. She learns that there's more for her to do in this life. Basically, she gets no answer and is sent back with this like question, this little question in her, right? And then we view her through a more modern lens of this middle, like adult aged Vasilisa, and how many of us in the show are around the same age. I'm 38 and Evie is just a couple years younger than me, and find ourselves in this space of like grasping, trying to define ourselves in this new adult age, trying to define our spirituality, define our place in this world, own our wholeness, take up space. And so that was a very like maybe modern lens, but maybe timeless too. And then as an elder, it was this more of nature, of the universe view of Vasilisa, like non-human, of like our spiritual wanderings, as you put. I think is really beautiful. Like what we all wonder, I think, as humans, is what becomes of us. Like, what was our life worth in the end? What becomes of us after this? I think we're afraid. I think we're curious. And those are all just open-ended questions that we were able to put forth in the end, that were like rooted just in our own wonderings. Yeah, that kind of went a lot of places, but yeah.
No, and that to me is also sort of encapsulates how spiritual communities throughout time, like how they have come together, because they do wonder what happens to us, and where do we go? And also definitely this marking of different life transitions, that being a really universal quality of different spiritual and faith communities, is marking coming of age, marking births, marking end of life, marking, and that's important. It's like there's something, for that to be a universal spiritual type of ritual and practice, that to me says that it's filling a need that we as humans have, right? And so that was the other part of that performance experience that really spoke to me, is how it really was marking these different stages in a girl's life, in a woman's life.
Yeah, it was very interesting to reflect inwardly as we were making this show about like the stage that I'm in now, directly reflected in the middle portion of the show. And then my grandmother was, at this point now, I know 1 year off from transitioning out of her body, but she was very ill for years. And so there was so much of what I was working on subconsciously and consciously that ended up in that last piece, because we're all trying to make sense of that, like you said. And we're like, I think we all hope for a beautiful transition for ourselves and really for our loved ones as we watch them, for them to be safe and to have like deep meaning.
Well, that really, like hearing that, you know, about where you and your grandmother were at the time, how would you say that your involvement in this show, your creation of this show, informed the way that you were with your grandmother at the end or towards the end?
I think a lot of what ended up in the piece, in the third portion, like it was collaborative as everything is, but some of the portions were things that I had written as my own reflections on what I imagined she could be going through and what I hope for her in the end of like receiving from her permission, this deep wisdom of like, I think Baba Yaga said at the end, you know, take the lid off and stir it up, right? Like this what you have now, this is it, this is the need of it. Like it's wonderful to wonder, but also just be, like just inhabit is hopefully like what the plane you reach when you've lived a beautiful long life. And that is kind of what I wanted to end up on stage in that moment. And I remember two performers creating a scene for that act when we were in the creation stages. And like, I think there was a moment where Basilisa and Baba Yaga put their foreheads together, and I like burst out bawling because it was so tender, and that tenderness and presence is really, that encapsulates my relationship with my grandmother. She was a very important person to me. She was like the epitome of grandmothers. And so it was really special. And she was able to come up and see the show, although she lives far away. And that was really meaningful to me. So it was just one of those life things where you are like very aware that you're so lucky that things are aligning.
Right. That sounds like a beautiful experience. And to me, it points to what, I'm trying to not say this too negatively, but like what's wrong with churches that they're not creating those kinds of experiences for people. I mean, like the way that you described being moved, the way, you know, to tears, that beauty, that tenderness, the way that it informed your presence, you know, with your grandmother. You know, that's what, if we're going to be gathering together weekly, that's the sort of thing that I wish more of us were doing on a regular basis, is creating something, is doing something that really moves people and creates transformative kinds of experiences.
As adults, we don't have an opportunity to play very much. And I attribute this playfulness and invitation to create to how I have access to those emotions and the words for it. And so we get together as a group, and through some structured, but also like very vulnerable and open activities, and under the guise of creating a character, you're able to kind of like pull at some threads that you might only have partly formed and start to like make sense of things, weave them together with other people's threads, start to understand how you feel about something, especially when it is a difficult or like quote unquote taboo topic like death. or aging, or how women are, and other gender identities, honestly, are othered in society to the side, like a lot of heavy things. But if we put it to some playful rules where kind of like anything goes that comes out, we can get at like some real truths, or what we think are truths at the time, right? In that moment.
Right. I love that. A way to get past those kind of walls or resistances that we have. I love that. That makes so much sense. So what if, so, you know, part of my job is like next fall figuring out Sunday school. What if I hired, instead of Sunday school teachers to come in for an hour, a weekend, I hired artists, different sorts, you know, in these different kinds of mediums to come in for an hour every week. How do you, like, what do you see unfolding from that?
Oh, I mean, I think that's a wonderful idea. Like, most of my identity was found through making art in a lot of different ways and continues to be the older I get. So I'm a huge subscriber to that. For a period of time, like I think 7 years, my husband and I used to create shows with high school students specifically in this manner. And it was very magical. Like, teenagers are absolutely incredible. Like, it's an incredible space to be in, to share space with teenagers and teenage artists. And what I often found specifically is that creating a show, rather than just like acting in a show, which is its own fun, allows you to reflect the best parts of the teenage performer back at themselves. Like, they show something of themselves that maybe they're not quite sure of because they're still figuring everything out, and you can shine that light right back on them. It's a great way to make individuals feel really seen for who they are. And again, like, to my previous answer, it is a great way to uncover how you think about something, which, as you described your congregation, is like, it really fits in, right? It's not about a prescribed dogma. It's about like understanding your world, finding the way you understand it. And so, I mean, I think it's brilliant.
And the space, I mean, the actual building it's bigger. I think, in my own right, it seems to me like it's much bigger than the Russian Art Museum in terms of, I mean, it has like the huge ceilings. I could definitely, with beams, I could definitely see aerial art, you know, dancers, and we have balconies around the back. Like, I could see all kinds of really fun things happening in that kind of space, and I'm sure it would get your creative juices flowing.
Totally, that would be fantastic.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope we can continue it sometime in the future, even, you know, especially as I'm kind of seeing myself in the beginning phases of some of these wonderings and imaginings and that sort of thing. And yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to add, or?
Nothing off the top of my head. I mean, it was very like heartening and fulfilling to reach back and think about that creative time, and I'm really looking forward to the world when we can be back in community and making things together. So I really appreciate the invitation to talk about it.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Well, thank you.